Okay, hello. My name is Stelios, and I have been an academic for some years now. I have worked on the philosophy of free will and moral responsibility, and I'm really interested in politics, and especially how the notions of freedom and responsibility bear into it. Today I'm going to talk to you about freedom of speech. And it's not incidental because I felt that at the university I couldn't speak so freely about what I believed. And I feel really good now.
I'm glad to hear that. That's wonderful to hear.
Okay, so one of the topics that interests me lately is the notion of hate speech and whether it is rising on Twitter.
Mm.
So, as of late, as you know, Elon Musk has bought Twitter, and this has he initially said that there should be amnesty in previously banned accounts. And he brought back suspended accounts.
Brought back Carl.
Yeah, exactly. And Jordan Peterson as well. And now Twitter is much more interesting. But this has sparked controversy. And we do have people who voice concerns about increase of hate speech. And I think it would be really interesting to examine those arguments. And let's see. So we could start by sharing Elon Musk's Twitter, where he actually presented a graph where he says that hate speech impressions are lower ever since he got it. But not many people have been convinced, and there may be also political motivations behind it. I'm sure the fact that he decided to lay off many woke employees of Twitter has played a part here. But there have been watchdog groups that publish reports and they express concerns that hate speech is rising. So I think it is a good opportunity if we see what they are saying. So if we could go on to the next, yes, here, and if we could go down a bit on the third, fourth, and fifth paragraph, a bit up.
Yeah, I think that's all right if you just want to go through it.
Yes. So how can we go up a bit?
This seems fine. It's on Friday afternoon, right?
Yes. Okay. So it says on Friday afternoon, Musk responded to a New York Times article. Sorry, I think it's upstairs.
It is a bit further up, please, John. There we go.
Yes. Okay. So on Friday, two watchdog groups published research that indicated Musk's claim simply did not hold water, offering one of the clearest pictures to date of the surging tide of hate speech on the platform. The Center for Countering Digital Hate and Anti-Defamation League both said in reports the volume of hate speech on Twitter has grown dramatically under Musk's stewardship. Specifically, the Center for Countering Digital Hate said the daily use of the N-word under Musk is triple the 2022 average, and the use of slurs against gay men and trans persons are up 58% and 62% respectively. Now, it's an interesting thing to see that no one mentioned the fact that Twitter accounts have increased. So, yes, we could say that Twitter tweets have been that use racial slurs have increased, but we should also factor in the increase of number in population of Twitter users.
And I was just thinking the daily use of the N-word under Musk being tripled could just mean that triple the amount of black people, black Americans specifically, could be using. I don't have the figures for that, but they're just taking data and making a complete inference from it.
Yeah, and some hip-hop videos do contain this word as well. So I think you're correct. And there's also another question that no one has asked, whether the increase in tweets is to be traced back to one person or to an equal amount of persons or not. So for instance, if there is an increase in 1,000 tweets using a particular slur, this doesn't mean that there are 1,000 more people who are using this particular racial slur. So there's a good argument there to be made that it is not exactly certain that...
Yeah, some of my Twitter alts just got put back on the site, that's all.
Yes.
Only kidding.
No, there is a good argument to be made as to what is the methodology that these reports are using to find out whether Twitter has become more toxic. So how do you think we should go about defining toxicity? And
well, for one, I dispute the phrase hate speech in the first place. I think it's a nonsense term designed to make people ashamed for the words they use rather than their behaviour and the actual spirit of the words that they're using. And I also think that maybe the best way to determine whether Twitter is an actively toxic place now would be to see the actual reactions of the people using it, and also whether engagement is up or down, because engagement going down would be a certain metric to prove that people aren't enjoying Twitter as much as they used to.
And they feel excluded
Potentially.
from public discussion, yeah.
Yeah, could be anything.
Because there is lots of arguments on the Democrats to say that somehow Twitter is taking people off, is actually not respecting people. But I think that if you allow people to have a voice, it works for the better. What do you think of this?
I mean, being someone who's generally in support of free speech, there's not really much I can say to disagree with that.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go down a bit. So I would like to have a conversation about, hate speech. You say you try to, you are not interested, you don't think that the notion is...
I think it's a nonsense term created by cry bullies to try and exert power over those who use language that they don't like. I mean, one of the first ways that you're able to control how somebody thinks is to be able to control the language that they're able to use. So they're noticing that the language that somebody else is using doesn't compart with their worldview, often a leftist worldview. Therefore, what's one of the best ways to get you to start to realign yourself into their worldview is to just restrict what they can say.
Yeah. So I think you're correct, and it would be interesting to have a more to look at it from a variety of angles, which I think we could do in this segment. So I think that it is interesting to understand what the argument is for free speech restriction, if there is, because some people they're just really performative in just saying I hate free speech, we should restrict free speech. So let us try to understand what it is that they're claiming. So I think the argument goes like this. So allowing for a freer expression of ideas makes Twitter more toxic. The increase of Twitter's toxicity contributes to the increase of hate speech. Therefore, we should not allow a freer expression of ideas on Twitter. So what do you make of this argument? I mean, you said... I have a feeling that you're not going to like it.
Well, yeah, I dislike that argument entirely. The allowing for free expression of ideas makes Twitter more toxic. That's just a complete inference. There's nothing to prove that. Excuse me. Increase of Twitter's toxicity contributes to the increase of hate speech, maybe, but once again, you're going to need to prove that. Therefore, we should not allow free expression of ideas on Twitter. Well, I think that's all based off, that endpoint would be based off the idea that hate speech is something to be combated legally in the first place, where I think the actual connection between hate speech, so-called, and real-life violence is tenuous at best.
I think that's a good question to ask ourselves. But if we go to the next source, I think we could look at let's try to see how hate speech is defined. So if we see here, the Merriam-Webster dictionary says that hate speech is speech expressing hatred of a particular group of people. This doesn't seem to be particularly illuminating, but perhaps we have a better version underneath on the same source.
If we scroll down a bit, John, please.
Yes. So it...
is it still further down?
A bit. Yeah, further down. Yes.
Here we go.
There's another definition that says speech that is intended to insult, offend, or intimidate a person because of some trait, as race, religion, sexual orientation, national origin, or disability. So there's a question there as to who gets to decide what is insulting, offending, or intimidating. What do you make of this? Because when we have a platform like Twitter that is supposed to have, or at least that many claim that it is supposed to have content moderation laws that should be transparent, there is this idea that someone has to make judgments in particular cases as to whether particular tweets are insulting, offending, or intimidating a person. And I think that there is a problem with the way that Twitter operated prior to Musk with all those suspensions, that there seems to be a difference between hate speech and moral outrage. And moral outrage sometimes can be interpreted by its recipients as an instance of hate speech.
Well, yeah. Are you talking about, for instance, the way that if you call somebody a groomer, they're saying that this is now anti-LGBTQ, blah, 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 hate speech, for instance, just because you're observing something that's obviously a form of grooming, and the fact that it's being done primarily by particular types of people doesn't necessarily have anything to do with you prescribing groomer to them, but then they associate it and say it's hate speech, and then they can shut you down.
Exactly, and we have to see exactly whether we are going to just stay on the level of generality and abstract principles, like, for instance, free speech absolutists are doing, and they say we categorically want free speech, and we don't care about particular situations, or you're going to focus on the particulars. And I think if you take the latter course, there still seems to be room for this.
Yeah, I don't know. With the whole hate speech thing, when we're talking about who gets to decide the rules, I think the fact that hate speech laws are often positioned against certain people on behalf of certain people, they always use the claim to justify it that those people are being marginalised in some way. But I'm sorry, the obvious truth of the matter is that if you have the entire force of the law behind you, defending you, making it so that people can't say things that upset you even just a little bit, then you're not marginalized. You have the entirety of the elites behind you. Just because you can say that you're an incredibly small part of population, percentage-wise, just because you can say that most of the public's opinions don't align with yours, doesn't mean you don't have elite backing that gives you the actual, real, concrete power that all of this is based on. So, for instance, you know, that original definition of hate speech, just the one where it's just, I was just saying mean things about people. Well, that... You know, loads of people constantly say things like kill all white people. You don't see them getting arrested for it. Whereas if I was to say the same thing about a different race, anyone other than white people, for instance, I could potentially get arrested for it if I was meaning it seriously.
Yes, and there is a bad trend, a very worrying trend, that you cannot express hatred towards a dominant group. So if, for instance, you say white people are the dominant group in a particular society, there are many academics who claim, for instance, that you cannot express hatred at the dominant group because they're a priori wrong and oppressive. Yes,
you can make those arguments, but what's all really being doing is just an expression of power.
Exactly. And you know what is, I think, infuriating, and if we could go to the next to the next link, is that frequently leftists are presenting their case as a defense of democracy, and I want us to see the next video. Yes, if we could have some audio.
A platform that is, like it or not, essential to democratic debate is run by a man who cannot distinguish the public interest from his interest.
So I think we don't need much more. This is Imran Ahmed from the Center for Countering Digital Hate. And he's very clear about saying that Twitter is essential for democratic dialogue. But I think that's performative.
I wonder who he donates to.
I think that's performative because the thing is that if you basically have such a wide understanding of what counts as hate speech, and if everyone who disagrees with the basic moral tenets of your worldview is presented as a hater and an extremist, then there isn't any room left for discussion, is there?
Well, no, not outside of the established parameters of discussion, which is always just going to be in the benefit of those in charge anyway.
And this is the issue, because real significant discussions, there are discussions that are ethical, at least in this context. There are discussions about value.
Well, there are discussions that actively hurt people as well. For instance, talking about the riots of the mid-2020 regarding BLM, discussing that in the actual reality of the people that it hurt is apparently harmful to those people who are going out and rioting and destroying people's businesses in their own neighborhoods.
This is exactly the inflated understanding of the notion of harm. We put forward an idea and we have a very sensitive, let's say, approach toward what constitutes harm. And this is actually where I think it is important to maintain. We cannot have democratic dialogue without maintaining that there is a distinction between hate speech, for instance, and moral outrage.
Mm. Well, I mean, I was going to say, I think there are things that I have moral outrage on that I don't think that people should be anywhere near as quick to speak about or permitted to speak about as sadly they are nowadays. For instance, the increase in people saying that we need to expand sex education and sexual understanding, so to speak, for younger and younger people. I think that's absolutely disgusting and should be shut down. But there's a very difference. I can draw direct lines between the harm done to actual people there, whereas with this, it's all very tenuous.
It is. And I think that this is a good case that you mentioned before with grooming. Because if we are going to get down to the level of the particular, instead of just focusing on general principles, we have to examine particular cases about grooming. We cannot just deny them generally.
In what sense?
In the sense that, there is a double standard by leftists.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah, so for some reason they want to say that, if you make any allegation that is specific, that a priori is wrong. Mm-hmm. And morally unjustified.
No. I agree with what you're saying. That I mean, we've gone over for years at this point just how many double standards there are within leftist thinking. Anyway,
so what about free speech absolutism? What do you think about free speech absolutism? Can there be arguments for restricting free speech?
I think Connor and I have discussed this before. I think that free speech absolutism is a nice ideal, but practically untenable, primarily because it's just one of those things where obviously no matter what your feelings on the idea of free speech are, there are going to be certain topics of discussion, certain subjects that you don't want anybody to broach, because you have to understand that even in allowing the conversation, you're allowing a certain moral legitimacy to those subjects. So the idea, like I say, if somebody says, I would like to discuss the age of consent and how we should be lowering it or abolishing it if I was French, for instance. And I think in even having that discussion with somebody, you're giving them the wiggle room to suggest, okay, we can have a chat about this. Oh, okay, so there is an argument, a rational argument that I could formulate to convince you that it's an okay thing. I think we should be saying, no, I don't think we should be having those conversations. And if you are thinking about having those conversations, you're probably a disgusting human being. But I don't know necessarily that I would be okay with just arresting them on that basis. I'm fine with social ostracism, but just arresting them, I don't know. This is something. It's when you start to really dig into the weeds here. That's when you start to really test people's principles, I find.
I agree with you, and I think that there can be cases for restricting free speech, such as the case for when a teacher walks into a classroom. I wouldn't like my kids to be taught just anything that comes to mind of people. So there is a question here, because I think it is important to address that many people on the left, they say that this is cherry picking from conservatives and classical liberals, and I think it is not, because we can make an argument that this is not an instance of bigotry, because the reason why we care about children not being exposed to such kind of teaching is that basically they are not old enough to critically evaluate what it is that they are being told.
No, of course not. Their minds are like sponges, as the old saying goes.
Exactly. And there is a worrying trend of making academia into a safe space, which is precisely that.
Well, it's a safe place for degenerate ideas. It's not necessarily a safe space for critical thought.
Yes, and there is this focus there, which I think is really, worrying, that there is this lack of focus on critical thinking, and this insistence that university students should be treated as children that are not going to be prepared for the real world that contains dangers and unsafe places, but citizens that will just demand safe spaces.
Yeah, you're actively setting up a generation of people who are going to be very easy to coerce and very easy to trick and very easily bamboozled.
Yes. And do you think that ultimately there seems to be an issue of extreme pacification?
In what sense?
In the sense that we are making that the more we press the agenda of free speech restriction, and the more we fail to make a distinction between hate speech and justified moral outrage, on the basis of which distinction we can have a moral debate, the more we are making dialogue impossible.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like just because I'm morally, just because I'm morally outraged over something doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to classify it as hate speech. But once again, if I feel a conversation needs to be shut down, I'm going to shut down that conversation. Now, I think that there will always be an Overton window. The problem is in the society that we exist in right now is that the Overton window has been pulled far too much to the left, and somebody like Elon Musk is thankfully doing a job to be able to pull that back towards. I know he's not trying to pull it to the right necessarily, but he's trying to pull it back to the centre, away from complete lunacy. Thanks for watching that segment from the podcast Lotus Eaters. I hope you're all having a very Merry Christmas. If you enjoyed that and want to find more, you can go to our website, lotuseaters.com, and subscribe for as little as £5 a month to become a premium member. But we do also have free content for those just wanting to dip their toe in first, including this recent video from Carl on reality against abstraction. If you're interested in finding more about what Carl is up to these days, you can follow him on Getter at Carl Benjamin. Thanks very much for watching. We'll see you again soon.